Imagine walking into a room and feeling everything before anyone says a word, noticing the tension between two people across the table, sensing who feels insecure, who feels unseen, who is pretending. You don't just observe emotions, you absorb them. And yet, while you understand everyone else with unsettling clarity, very few people seem to understand you. There is a strange paradox in this. You are deeply empathetic, but not fragile. You feel intensely, but you don't collapse. You care, but you refuse to be controlled. And that combination confuses people. Because empathy is often associated with softness, with vulnerability, with being easily manipulated. But what if there exists a rare type of person who feels deeply and sees clearly at the same time? Someone who can sense deception without becoming cynical. Someone who understands darkness without being consumed by it. Carl Jung once wrote that the most powerful individuals are those who confront their shadow instead of denying it. Most people either drown in emotion or detach from it. But what if you've done something different? What if you've faced your pain, your trauma, your own inner chaos and come out more aware rather than more bitter? Have you ever noticed that you can read people almost instantly? That manipulation rarely works on you for long. That you often become the emotional anchor in relationships even when you never asked for that role. But here's the heavier question. Why does being this way feel lonely? Why does seeing through people make connection harder instead of easier? Why do you attract narcissists, wounded individuals, or people who mistake your empathy for weakness? Maybe the problem isn't that you're too sensitive. Maybe the problem is that you're rare. In a world that rewards surface-level interactions, depth feels threatening. In a culture that avoids self-confrontation, self-awareness feels intimidating. And when you combine empathy with strength, you disrupt dynamics that rely on emotional imbalance. So how do you know if you're this type? Not a typical empath, not someone who absorbs and collapses, but what some psychologists quietly describe as a super empath, one who feels deeply but refuses to be controlled. The signs are subtle, powerful, and once you recognize them, you may start to understand why your life has unfolded the way it has. To understand the rare personality often called the super empath, you first have to understand something uncomfortable about human nature. Empathy alone does not create strength. Most highly empathetic people grow up absorbing the emotional climate around them. They learn to read moods for survival. They detect subtle shifts in tone, posture, silence, in mani, gases. This ability begins early, especially in unpredictable environments where emotional awareness becomes protection. But here is where the difference begins. Some empaths collapse under emotional weight. They overextend overkive. They struggle with boundaries. Their empathy becomes A super empath does something different. At some point, often after betrayal, trauma, or deep disillusionment, they confront the darker side of human nature. They stop romanticizing people. They begin to see manipulation patterns. They study motives. They observe power dynamics instead of ignoring them. Carl Jung described this process as integration of the shadow. The shadow is not evil, it is the hidden part of the psyche. The anger you suppress. The boundaries you avoid. The instincts you were taught to silence. Most people either deny their shadow or become consumed by it. But the rare personality type does something else. They integrate it. They remain empathetic, but they are no longer naive. They feel deeply but they also analyze. They understand pain, but they no longer excuse harm. This creates a powerful psychological shift. Empathy plus awareness equals discernment, and discernment changes everything. Because once you understand both vulnerability and manipulation, you can no longer be easily controlled. You sense when someone is projecting. You notice when guilt is being weaponized. You detect emotional inconsistencies long before others do. This is why super empaths often attract narcissistic personalities. Narcissists are drawn to emotional depth, but they expect emotional submission. They seek people who will absorb blame, people who will doubt themselves, people who will overextend. But a super empath eventually pushes back. Not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly, and that resistance disrupts the dynamic. This is also why this personality type feels rare. It requires suffering to develop. It requires self-reflect. It requires facing uncomfortable truths about oneself and others. It is not created by comfort. It is forged by awareness. And while that awareness creates strength, it also creates consequences you may not fully recognize yet. Being a super empath doesn't just change how you see others, it changes how you move through the world. At first, your heightened awareness feels like a gift. You read people quickly. You sense tension before conflict begins. You detect manipulation before it fully unfolds. While others are confused, you already understand the emotional undercurrent of the room. But over time, something else begins to happen. You start feeling slightly separate, not superior, not detached, just apart. When you see through people too easily, small talk becomes exhausting. Performative kindness feels obvious. Emotional games feel transparent. And because you understand the motives beneath behavior, it becomes harder to fully relax inside it. This creates an invisible loneliness. Not because you lack connection, but because depth is rare. Psychologically, your brain is constantly scanning micro-expressions, tone shifts, inconsistencies. This hyper-awareness, while protective, also increases cognitive load. You process more than most people realize. Neuroscience suggests that high emotional attunement activates multiple regions of the brain at once: empathy networks, threat detection systems, memory recall. You are not only feeling, you are analyzing while feeling. That's exhausting. Another consequence appears in relationships. You attract wounded people. Not by choice, but by resonance. People sense your emotional intelligence. They sense your patience, your ability to hold complexity. And those who struggle with accountability often gravitate towards someone who understands pain. But understanding pain is not the same as tolerating harm. Eventually, the super empath reaches a threshold where empathy no longer overrides self-respect. And when that happens, something surprising occurs. People who once felt comfortable around you begin to feel threatened, because your empathy used to absorb imbalance. Now it exposes it. This can lead to conflict, misunderstanding, even accusations that you've changed. But you haven't changed. You've integrated. The deeper consequence, though, is internal. You may begin questioning yourself. Am I too intense? Too perceptive? Too unwilling to ignore red flags? Should I just be simpler? But simplicity was never your nature. And the real danger isn't that you feel too much. It's that you might shrink yourself to make others more comfortable. Which brings us to the most important question. Have you ever heard the term super empath? It sounds like something out of a comic book, right? A superhero of feelings. But what happens when this superhero decides to rebel? It's not what you think. It's not about fighting back or becoming aggressive. The rebellion of a super empath is actually a quiet, powerful revolution. It's about finally learning to say no. For years, maybe their whole lives, super empaths have been absorbing the emotions of everyone around them. They feel everything so deeply: your joy, your pain, your stress. It's like being a sponge in an ocean of feelings. They give and give, often until they have nothing left for themselves. Their default setting is to heal, to help, to fix. But this constant outflow of energy can be completely draining, leaving them feeling exhausted, misunderstood, and even taken for granted. So, what does their rebellion look like? It starts with building a wall. Not a wall to keep people out, but a boundary to protect their own peace. It's the moment they realize their empathy is a precious resource, not an infinite well. They start choosing where their energy goes. They learn that no is a complete sentence. It doesn't need an excuse or a long explanation. No, I can't help with that right now. No, I don't have the emotional space for this. It's a radical act of self-preservation. This isn't about becoming cold or selfish. Far from Italiano. This is the integration of deep compassion with healthy assertiveness. It's about understanding that you can't pour from an empty cup. A rebellious super empath still cares deeply, but they now care for themselves with the same intensity they once reserved only for others. They start to distinguish between what's their emotion to carry and what belongs to someone else. They stop setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. Think of it like this. An empath without boundaries is like a house with all its doors and windows wide open, letting in every storm. A rebellious super empath learns how to close a few windows. They can still see the storm, They can have compassion for those in it, but they no longer let it flood their own home. They are creating a safe inner space. This journey also involves a major shift in their relationships. They start to gravitate towards people who don't just take, but who also give. They seek out connections where their depth is not seen as too much, but is actually understood and valued. They intentionally create spaces, friendships, partnerships, communities where they can be their authentic selves without fear of being drained. This means they might have to let go of relationships that are one-sided or energetically taxing. This can be painful, but it's a necessary part of their rebellion. They're choosing quality over quantity. So, the super empath's rebellion isn't loud. It's not a declaration of war. It's a quiet, firm commitment to their own well-being. It's the beautiful, courageous act of reclaiming their own energy. It is about learning that their greatest strength are empathies, most powerful when it is balanced with the wisdom to protect it. It is the moment they stop being just a sponge and become a source of light and compassion that flows from a well that is finally being refilled. If this resonates with you, know that you're not alone in this journey. Setting boundaries is a skill, and it's one of the most loving things you can do for yourself and ultimately for others. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. See you next time.